back, AP Psychers. In today's video, we are going to look at the theories of emotion outlined in Essential Task 8.4. Just looking at Prezi, just making a concept map might not be sufficient in actually understanding these concepts. So we're going to today take a few moments to overview each of them. We're going to start with the James Lange theory. Take a look below. I have a key of 4 symbols that I'm going to use to outline each of the steps involved in these theories of emotion. This key will make more sense once I actually start with the first example. But the green eye is going to represent a stimulus, meaning the sight of something in your environment. The classic example that we used all throughout the year was seeing a bear walk into the class. So the green eyeball is going to represent a stimulus. For the circumstances here, that's going to be the appearance of a bear. The red heart is going to represent arousal. So we're talking about sweating, heart rate increasing, etc. Some type of physiological response. The word think in blue is going to represent what's called cognitive labeling or appraisal. You'll notice that this is not used in all of the theories. As a matter of fact, we won't get to a blue think until the third theory. And then finally, at the very end, I wrote the word fear with an exclamation point. That's supposed to represent the emotion. In one way, shape, or form, each of these theories tries to explain how the presence of a bear all of a sudden triggers an emotion. So let's start with the first step, which is the appearance of a stimulus. So the James Lange theory argues that it starts with the green eye, the sight of a bear. Then, after you see a bear, your heart begins to race and you experience physiological arousal. Then, you experience fear. This is the earliest of all of the theories. You don't need to know the year, but this was written about in the 19th century in 1884. This is the most outdated of any of the emotion theories we talk about. It is not really accepted by anyone in today's scientific community. It is by far the most antiquated view of emotion, and it has really one huge downfall. This theory essentially argues that when your heart begins to race, you then begin to experience the emotion of fear. As you know, there are numerous circumstances, like playing a sport or going on a first date, where your heart might race, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're afraid. Now, if your heart's racing in the middle of a football game, that doesn't necessarily always mean that you're experiencing the emotion of fear. There are plenty of circumstances when your heart's racing and you're sweating and you're experiencing a totally different emotion. So unfortunately for this theory, it did a very poor job explaining how your heart racing actually results in emotions that aren't necessarily always fear. So although it is the first that we need to talk about, it is by far the most antiquated and outdated of any of the theories. The second theory of emotion is what we call the Cannon-Bard theory, which was written about 35 years, approximately 35 years after the James Lange theory that we just talked about. The Cannon-Bard theory tried to explain how physiological arousal, such as sweating or heart rate increase, can occur when you're afraid, but also when you're excited. So we're going to start the same way we started the first scenario, with the green eye. Again, the green eye represents, in this circumstance, the presence of a bear. So now we see the sight of a bear. The Cannon-Bard is a little bit different. With the Cannon-Bard theory, you notice how I have sort of a different indicator here. I have 2 arrows that are pointing at the same time to both physiological arousal and emotion. What the Cannon-Bard theory argued is that the presence of a bear triggers 2 things at the exact same time. There is no delay between what your body is experiencing and the corresponding emotion. Which means you could encounter a bear, your heart rate would increase, you would start to sweat, you would experience all of those physiological indicators, but you would also be experiencing fear simultaneously. That's the key word, simultaneously. But you theoretically could also be really excited and really happy, and you could be experiencing physiological arousal in the same way that you would if a bear was present, heart rate increase and sweating, but you could be happy, you could be experiencing a positive emotion. This theory leaves space to explain how heart rate and sweating can correlate to not only fear, but also positive emotions like happiness. The key is that these two things happen simultaneously. There's not some delay, as the James Lange first theory tried to articulate. As a mnemonic, it's not the greatest mnemonic, but when I look at the word bard, it's 4 letters long, and it begins with the word B, and it reminds me of the word both, another 4-letter word. I use that as a mnemonic because I think to myself, both happen at the same exact time. Heart and fear, or heart and happiness, happen at the exact same time. The third theory is what we call the Schachter-Singer two-factor theory. Honestly, you can sometimes see it called the two-factor theory of emotion. Luckily, the College Board has been using the full name recently, so that's what we're going to continue with. It's a little bit more modern. It was from the 60s. Again, you don't need to know the year, but I think seeing the years can help put these into context. This is by far the most universally accepted theory of emotion out there today in a modern context. The Cannon-Bard and the James Lange theory are antiquated and outdated. There is a very clear reason, which you'll see in just a moment, why this theory has particular scientific value today. We're going to start in the same place that we've been with the stimulus. Once we encounter the bear, then our heart starts to race. So far, we are following the exact same procedure as the first theory, James Lange. Heart is going to follow the presence of the stimulus. Then we're going to think. So we have a brand new symbol that we have not previously used, and we're going to explain what that means in just a second. After that, then we're going to experience fear. So let's take a look at this theory and try and explain what it's trying to articulate. You see a bear. Your heart starts to race. Now we're going to add cognition, what we call cognitive labeling or cognitive appraisal, where you stop and think to yourself, why is my heart racing? Oh, I'm afraid of this bear. That's why my heart is racing. I'm afraid, or I'm scared. Once you've cognitively labeled why your heart is racing, then the corresponding motion happens, where you actually experience fear. What's really fascinating about the Schachter-Singer two-factor theory is this theory does a really good job explaining what we call mislabeling arousal. I'm going to give you a little bit of a different scenario here. One of the reasons the Schachter-Singer two-factor theory is so popular is it does a really good job of explaining some scenarios, and it's been studied in numerous different cases. So let's say you are on a roller coaster. So that is the stimulus. Roller coasters are going to make your heart race. According to the way emotion works, at least in the context of this theory, you then need to stop and think about why your heart is racing. Under most circumstances, the obvious reason why your heart is racing after being on a roller coaster, going onto a roller coaster, is that you're afraid. However, let's put this into the context of a first date. So you're on a roller coaster, your heart's racing, and then you have to think for a moment. What if, sitting there, thinking about why your heart is racing, you all of a sudden think you're in love, or you're affectionate towards the person that you were with. You could, in theory, what we call mislabel your arousal. Because the actual underlying reason why your heart is racing is actually the roller coaster. However, according to the way this theory works, in order to feel any emotion, you need to think about what your body is doing. And you could be sitting there, walking off of the roller coaster on this first date, and think to yourself, why is my heart racing? Oh, my heart's racing. Why is my heart racing? I must really like the person that I'm with. I must feel a lot of affection towards the person I'm with. The final is what we call the cognitive appraisal theory. This one is popular in the modern context. It might not quite be as popular, though, as the Schachter-Singer two-factor theory. Cognitive appraisal is a theory from a gentleman by the name of Richard Lazarus. He first started to write about it in the 70s. He wrote about an update of it in the 90s, and he continued to write about emotion until the early 2000s when he passed away. Very similar first beginning. We always start with the stimulus. What's a little bit different here, though, is we're now going to flip the second and third phase, at least in comparison with the Schachter-Singer two-factor theory. So, you see a bear, then you think about Am I afraid of bears? How do I feel about bears? Are bears threatening? What is the circumstance in which I am seeing this bear? Once you realize that you are in fact afraid of bears, then your body responds with the physiological arousal. Once your body is responding with the physiological arousal, that is after when you see the fear. So, you see a bear, then you think, am I afraid of bears? So this is different than the third theory. In the third theory, you thought about, why is my body sweating? Why am I sweating? Why is my heart racing? Why is this happening? With the cognitive appraisal theory, there is thinking involved. There is cognition involved. But you're thinking, am I afraid of that bear? Well, what time of the day is it? Is it a cub? Is it a black bear? Where am I? Am I inside? Am I outside? What's the situation? You have to think about what you are experiencing in terms of a stimulus. Once you have evaluated and appraised the situation, then your body responds. Then you finally follow up with fear.